Temperatures in Johannesburg and 8 other South African cities are rising at a rapid rate. This was revealed by the University of Reading last month. Now, the question on our minds now is Joburg experiencing a heat wave, or is it the implications of global warming? Let's unpack this further with the Dean of Henley Business School South Africa, Jonathan Foster Pedley. Thank you very much for your time this evening. And that is the big question, isn't it? Yes. What are we experiencing in the city?
Well, it's huge. So it's not really either or, because the climate is changing, because we're getting hotter in South Africa, you're just going to get more heat waves. And so what's happening is you've got climate instability. South Africa is actually warming at, some people say, twice the global average, which is a bit worrying. And it's very interesting when you look at the facts between Johannesburg and the other cities around. Johannesburg is actually warming faster than Cape Town, which is a worry as well. So in fact, you're having more heat waves because the general temperature is higher, and you're seeing that effect all around the world. In Portugal right now and in Europe, same issues going on.
Yeah, and what are the implications of rising temperatures that are to the detriment of citizens of the different cities?
Well, it makes a huge difference, apart from the fact that in due course sea levels will rise, which will mean that some of the cities won't be so habitable. What's going to happen is you're going to get climate instability. So in the north east of South Africa, up there by St. Lucia and Mozambique, you're going to get these tropical cyclones coming in more and more. Then you'll see massive rainfall you've seen down in Durban recently. In fact, you've had 8 major climate incidents over the last 5 or 6 years, and that's half you've had over the last 20 or 25 years. And then you're going to see the northwest of the country. I sound like a weatherman, don't I? The northwest of the country is generally hotter anyway, yes. So that's going to heat up. And then you're going to get increased droughts as well, and the crops won't be able to survive in that. And then you're going to find people migrating even more from the countryside to the towns. The infrastructure will be stretched. So it's a very, very challenging thing. And we have to get ahead of this now. We have to be really ahead of it, because big issues like this are really hard to get your head around.
Yeah, and I want us to talk about how we get ahead of this issue before it gets too big for us to handle. But before that, you raised something that I wanted us to touch on, and that's the food security component of rising temperatures. And we've already got issues and concerns around it here in South Africa and globally, I suppose. But that food security issue is one that we're going to need to look closely at as we consider this climate change.
Well, it's a massive thing. And of course, food patterns are changing. Without getting into all the controversy about whether you should eat more or less meat, the truth is that growing grains for meat production and the land use for meat production is so vast that land can't be used for natural sources. And there's a really extensive use of land. If you use those for crops more, if we change our diets a little bit, then you would find that you would use less land, and you would put more back into the soil, because, animals scrub up the soil and leave all sorts of deposits on it, aren't always good for it. And so what will happen is, if we don't watch out, that we'll find the land will become impoverished and nature will be pushed out as well. What we need to do is change patterns of agriculture quite quickly, use different crop varieties, be very clever about how we use water. And I don't play golf, and I'm a member of a golf club because it's right by the corner of me, but unfortunately you've got to be careful with your water. You can't be using as much water going forward, and the richer and the more prosperous people use a lot more water compared with poorer people, massively greater. So we've all got to get more disciplined and more aware of what's going on around us.
Yeah, so the change in the agriculture patterns, but also it sounded like you say many of us should probably become vegan. I don't know if I'm ready for that just yet. But
I'm not saying vegan. I'm just saying more vegetables, less meat.
Yeah. No, let's get ahead of the curve then. What are some of the immediate initiatives that local governments can look at to protect cities' infrastructure and the like from the rising temperatures and, of course, global warming?
Well, the first thing is global warming is by nature a global issue. It's actually climate breakdown is more true than global warming. So if you're going to engage in a global thing, then the government has to engage in all the agreements internationally around COP27 and all the other agreements to maintain our part of reducing carbon emissions, etc. Now, this is controversial because people want to use gas or nuclear. Maybe they're good ideas, but we have to get involved in those. Secondly, we have to start changing our patterns. We have to protect what we've got. We have to change, move to alternative energy sources. That's really important. because that'll actually reduce the pressure on the grid and make it easy to use the sun that's all around us, so we won't be pumping out coal, etc. And it'll also reduce the pollution in the country. And then we need to think about the jobs that are going to be damaged by this, and we have to think differently about agriculture. We've got to worry about health and schooling, as we're going to get mass migration, quite likely, into the cities, but also into other countries going forward over the next 20 years, even earlier than that. So what a government needs to do is really engage with these agreements, really properly engage with them, and also start training and educating people. But the truth is, without education, without putting a lot of effort into education in the country, how can people have the opportunity to understand this, and how can they have the opportunity to make alternative jobs? Because a lot of the new jobs are very high-tech or high-knowledge, creative sort of jobs. They're the ones that build economies. We need to shift the South African economy towards those jobs a lot more, instead of just digging things out the ground and selling it raw. We have to beneficiate and develop South Africa as a modern economy, and not just a factor-based one.
And does our current education system concern you in terms of us moving towards the direction you've just described, where the jobs of the future are going to start, you're going to need to start being educated on them now? Are you concerned that our systems are not moving fast enough to ensure that we have those skills of the future?
I'm very concerned about that. I mean, I think the problem is, OECD said recently that only 55% of South Africans have the jobs they need for our current economy. But we need to change the economy, so we're going to find less and less people with the right jobs. So I'm very concerned about the capacity of the education system to speed up. I'm also very worried about the lack of training in trades, etc., because that is the way that you can really build people's futures. You can come through the trades. You can go on to higher degrees later, but we need to make things. We need to have a productive economy, and we need to give people hope and honourable work, and that's what we need to do. So the education system is really struggling to do that, and unless we change it, we will be overtaken. So I think we've got to look at alternative forms of education, a lot more online education, even using more international partners for education as well, and rapidly improve the capacity of our universities and TVETs to develop job useful training, not just academic training for things for which there are no jobs. So we've got to give people hope, and for that means a revolution in education in South Africa.
Yeah, you mentioned this very briefly a little earlier, the energy crisis. How do we deal with the Eskom mess? Because as long as we have that and our inability to move rapidly towards alternative sources of power, we are going to continue to be creating this big carbon footprint in our cities, in our countries and surroundings.
It's a huge thing. It's not just a technical problem, it's a governance problem too. I mean, there's a story of the tragedy of the condoms. In England, where I came from originally, people would put their goats and cows on common land, and I think it happens elsewhere, and everyone would put their goats on it. But once that common land becomes depleted, the cows and goats start dying, who takes their goats off first? And everyone keeps putting them on. Same with Eskom. Unless we really hit the governance, unless we understand that electricity is for the people, that we have to make sure we have very strong governance so that all the electricity is shared to the people who most need it in the poor communities. They're the ones who desperately need it, and in our agricultural and our industrial base, we won't be able to make the transition. And that means we have to shift our source of electricity to different bases, and we have to improve the distribution, which often means creating more local distribution capability and having houses and communities that can work on solar a lot more than they are at the moment. We have to really be serious about our transformation.
Thank you so much for joining us in studio, Jonathan.
Thank you.
That is Jonathan Foster Pedley, who's the Dean of Henley Business School, South Africa, talking to us about that climate instability that is happening across cities, not just in South Africa, but in the world really, and the implications if it's not dealt with immediately.